Hi everyone, and welcome back to today's Read Aloud. I hope you all had a really great day today. I know I did. I volunteered and I got a bunch of work done on my computer, and it was really satisfying. So, even in the darkest of times, one can always find happiness if you remember to turn on the light. Albus Dumbledore, I believe it was Sorcerer's Stone, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Don't correct me. So, as you can maybe tell from our image in the back, we are going to be reading stories about girl power today. So, instead of reading a full picture book, we are actually going to be reading mini biographies from this book, Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, and it was written by Elena Favalli and Francisca Cavello, and is published in 2016. A really cool thing about this book is for a long time these women tried to find a publisher to publish this book and they didn't. They couldn't find one. Nobody wanted to pick it up. So instead what they did is they took to the internet and they asked a bunch of people online if they would be willing to fund the publication of this book. And not only was this book funded, but it was the most funded book in the history of online crowdfunding, which is a really big feat to have. So the way that this book works is it's a bunch of little one-page biographies about different famous women through history. Today we are going to be reading 4 of them. We are going to be reading about Florence Nightingale, Harriet Tubman, Michelle Obama, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There are a lot of different heroines in this book. They go back a long ways. They go forward a long ways. But I figured that we will read a few of the more popular ones or the more well-known ones today in here, and then if we want to, we can always come back and check it later. I also have this book. We won't be reading it from it today, but it's something that we could look into in the future. It is called Rejected Princesses by Jason Porath. It is very similar to this book, but the main difference is that this is going to be a much higher reading level. A lot of the biographies in this book are much more in-depth, and they are a little bit more honest in some of their descriptions of some of the trials that these women went to. I will say that if you are an older reader and this is something that interests you, if you're under the age of 18, just, make sure you chat with a parent, let them know. But for parents, it is very well marked on the side as to the type of content for each of the stories that your child might be reading, like what might be in there. So it's a really awesome book, and Jason Porath was actually a former animator at DreamWorks, so a lot of his, I believe it's DreamWorks, let me check. Yep, DreamWorks, just wanted to make sure it wasn't the other one. So a lot of the images in there are very 3D animated and look really familiar, a lot of How to Train Your Dragon 2 vibes. But we'll save this one for later. Until then, let's get started with Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. And we're going to start out with my girl, Florence Nightingale. And Florence Nightingale's illustration was done by Dalia Rosavani. Okay. Once upon a time, a baby was born to an English couple traveling in Italy. They decided to name their daughter after the beautiful city where she was born, so they named her Florence. Florence loved traveling. She loved math and science, and she loved collecting information. Whenever she traveled to a new place, she would note down how many people lived there, how many hospitals there were, and how big the city was. She loved numbers. Florence studied nursing and became so good that the government sent her to manage a hospital for injured soldiers in Turkey. As soon as she arrived, Florence started collecting and examining all the data she could find. She discovered that most of the soldiers died not because of their wounds, but because of infections and diseases contracted in the hospital. The very first requirement in a hospital is that it should do the sick no harm, she said. She made sure that everyone working there washed their hands frequently and kept everything clean. At night, she carried a lamp as she made her rounds, talking to her patients and giving them hope. Thanks to her, many more soldiers made it home safely, and she became known as the Lady with the Lamp. Florence Nightingale lived from May 12, 1820 to August 13, 1910 in the United Kingdom. A lot of people refer to Florence Nightingale as the mother of modern nursing. She was a very influential figure and really helped shape a lot of our healthcare system. All right, up next we're going to read about Harriet Tubman, and her illustration was done by a woman named Sally Nixon. One day, a girl was standing in front of a grocery store when a black man came running past. He was being chased by a white man who yelled, "Stop that man! He is my slave!" She did nothing to stop him. The girl's name was Harriet. She was 12 years old, and she was also enslaved. Harriet hoped the man would escape. She wanted to help him. Just then the overseer hurled an iron object at the running man. He missed, but hit Harriet on the head. She was badly injured, but her thick hair cushioned the blow enough to save her life. "My hair had never been combed," she said, "and it stood out like a bushel basket." A few years later, the family who owned her put her up for sale, so Harriet decided to escape. She hid in the daytime and traveled by night. When she crossed the border into Pennsylvania, she realized for the first time in her life she was free. "I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person that I was free. There was such glory all over everything, and I felt like I was in heaven." She thought about the runaway slave and her family in Maryland, who were still enslaved. She knew she had to help them. Over the next 11 years, she went back 19 times and rescued hundreds of enslaved people. She was never captured, and she never lost a single person. Harriet Tubman lived approximately from 1822 to March 10, 1913, in the United States of America. She is known as the founder and the main director of the Underground Railroad, so as you start learning more about history, or as some of you might have heard in your history books, it was a huge part of the freedom movement with with the Civil War and freeing hundreds of slaves to the north. All right, our next rebel woman we're going to be reading about is Michelle Obama, and her illustration was done by Martha Signori. Once upon a time, there was a girl who was always afraid. Her name was Michelle Robinson, and she lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Chicago with her family. "Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I'm not good enough," she worried. Her mother would say, "If it can be done, you can do it." "Anything is possible," said her dad. Michelle worked hard. Sometimes teachers told her she should not aim too high because her grades were not that good. Some people said she would never achieve something big because she was just a black girl from the south side of Chicago. But Michelle chose to listen to her parents. Anything is possible, she thought. So she graduated from Harvard and became a lawyer at a big firm. One day, her boss asked her to mentor a young lawyer. His name was Barack Hussein Obama. They fell in love and got married a few years later. One day, Barack told her he wanted to become president of the United States. At first, she thought he was crazy, but then she remembered, if it can be done, you can do it. So she quit her job and helped him on his campaign. Barack won the elections twice, and Michelle became the first African-American First Lady of the United States. "No one is born smart. You become smart through hard work," is her motto. Michelle Obama is still alive today, and she was born on January 17, 1964. I'm a big Michelle Obama fan. All right. This next heroine is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She is a Supreme Court Justice, and her illustrator was done by Eleanor Davis. Once upon a time, there was a girl who dreamed of becoming a great lawyer. "A lady lawyer?" people would mock her. "Don't be ridiculous. Lawyers and judges are always men." Ruth looked around her and saw that they were right. But there's no reason why that shouldn't change, she thought to herself. She applied to Harvard Law School and became one of its brightest students. Her husband, Marty, was also a student at Harvard. Your wife should be home baking cookies and looking after the baby, people used to say. But Marty didn't listen. Ruth was a terrible cook, and besides, he loved taking care of their daughter and was proud of his brilliant wife. Ruth was passionate about women's rights and argued 6 landmark cases on gender equality before the United States Supreme Court. Then she became the second female Supreme Court justice in the country's history. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. If I'm asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? I say, when there are 9. People are shocked, but there have been 9 men, like forever, and nobody's raised an eyebrow at that. Even in her 80s, Ruth does 20 push-ups every day and has become a style icon, thanks to the extravagant collards she wears in court with her judge's robes. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was born on March 15, 1933. In addition, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is still alive. She is a cancer survivor and just beat her last round of cancer. And she is well into her 80s and still serving on the Supreme Court. All right, friends, so those were a few vignettes from Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. I do know that these folks came out with a sequel called Goodnight Stories for Rebel Boys. However, I do not currently own a copy of it. I will be on the lookout for it. And hopefully we can read some stories from there and maybe some stories from Rejected Princesses. I hope you all had a wonderful Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. And I'm thinking of you all so much. Remember to keep your chin up and keep that light shining. Have a great day.